Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Science of Soul podcast. This week we are talking about memories. What is a memory? How does it work in the brain? And what does that mean for who we are as people and the story that we create about ourselves? We're also looking at how a Hafidh becomes a Hafidh, someone who memorizes the Quran. We've got a guest on, Hafiz Muhammad Tahir, who is my younger brother, and he's going to be talking about that. And if you are listening on Apple Podcast or Google Podcast, or even on YouTube, please subscribe and give us a review, 5 stars, thumbs ups, all that good stuff, because it'll help boost our podcast and get more listeners, and share it with your loved ones. So enjoy this episode. All right, boys. Assalamu alaikum.
I've changed position so people think that it's actually a new day.
You've just completely given it away that we're doing all these episodes in one day.
Try my best.
All right, so let me just tell you a quick anecdote. It was a week ago that, this laptop right here that you're looking at, this laptop's from 2012. A week ago, I bought a hard drive to upgrade this one's hard drive. So the hard drive I bought, it's not actually a hard drive, it's an SSD, which is a solid state drive. So I put that in here now. This computer's so fast now, mashallah, compared to how it was. Imagine, it's 8 years old. It's 2020 now, and this laptop is from 2012, and it's running faster than some like laptops from the shop now would. And it kind of got me thinking, because on my old hard drive, there was all these pictures and videos and files and things, effectively records and memories that I had to transfer over to this one.
Yeah.
Now this one is super fast, and it just got me thinking on this subject of talking about memory and what memory is. And so for that we got a guest on, Hafiz Tahir. What do they call you?
Tahir, yeah.
Yeah, Hafiz Tahir. And you're also Hafiz, mashallah. So I feel like with Ramadan coming up and the need for the Huffaz are going to be, it's when all these people who've memorized the Quran come out to lead the Taraweeh prayers. I feel like it's a cool time to talk about this awesome thing that all of us take for granted, especially if you're young and growing up and you don't even think about it, but maybe you might do when you're old and getting dementia.
It's actually crazy. So I have a story about about memory and how society looks at memory. Well, kind of. When I was applying, doing my personal statement for saying why I want to become a medic, right? My opening statement, the opening statement was describing an incident that happened when I was in year 1. And I remember this. It's maybe, it's something that I've enjoyed since then.
Yeah,
I guess, right? So it was an assembly, and we were doing a play, and we were trying to describe how the digestive system works. So I had to stand there with, when the colored paper that they put on the walls to kind of decorate the school posters or whatever they are, display boards, right?
Yeah.
They had a tube, and I had to drop a coin or whatever, something through it, and I had to say, this isn't how the apple, or this isn't how food drops down. I can't remember what I said, but I was just demonstrating this isn't how it happens. And there's 2 girls next to me, and they were holding a tight, and the teachers had kind of cut the tights, the legs, and they passed a apple through, and they were doing the Paracelsus through the kind of the esophagus into the stomach, which was kind of the bit that is around the the pelvis area, and then down the rest of it until it comes out from the thing. Anyway, that is what I kind of wrote in a very good way.
Yeah.
And I asked a medical student to read this, and he was on the he was like, he was doing something for the university, and he said, maybe not put that in because people might think it's made up.
Okay.
Because you probably can't remember back then. But I have memories from before then.
Yeah.
And
so how did you feel when he said that?
I said, well, it's true. And it's actually a good story. And I personally think that is when my passion for the human body and my curiosity of how things work started
All the way back then.
all the way back then.
Yeah.
And it led me to, I remember a few years later or a year later, I went to Bangladesh and I was fascinated about animals. I would be asking stupid questions like, why don't cows have shoes? This is how a cow eats. Like I came back and I said, you know what? Cows actually don't eat like this, like we do, like up and down. They slide their mouth out. They do that. They do a grinding
If you're listening to the podcast and you're not watching on YouTube, Abdin is moving his jaw left and right in the fashion of a cow.
So I think, I again, I know you asked me to do a bit of research into this. I haven't got time
That's
because
fine.
of
Corona,
cheeky COVID.
Cheeky COVID, yeah.
So I'm gonna have to rely on the
Your
kind
memories.
of my memories, and the knowledge that it's been
Okay.
10 years,
well, okay.
more than 10
that's
years that I
good.
studied
So
psychology.
let's take it back to that part in your anecdote of why that your tutor was not too keen on you using
He's
your memory.
not my tutor, but a medical student.
Medical student.
Yeah.
Like why?
I've
he
never
wasn't-
met him in face to face. Because he thought that it wasn't. People might question the
reliable.
reliability
Okay.
of it because it was such a long time ago.
Yeah.
But
So there's something about a memory that could be called into question. It's not a solid thing. Like,
No.
for example, you know how I was talking about my computer had all these files,
yeah,
these videos and these photos, which if I look at,
yeah.
it's the same photo that it was when it was taken.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
each time I look at it, it doesn't
Yeah.
change. What is it about a memory that, I'm not asking you this, I'm just saying, what is it about a memory that he didn't feel confident that could be used? You know, I think that's an interesting thing.
But at the same time, I guess, some of the stronger memories are memories that have a lot of emotion behind them. You can collect memories in different parts of your brain.
Yeah.
You can have emotional, and then in the amygdala you store emotional memories. In the hippocampus you store different types of memories, and then you have other parts of the brain. So I'm just thinking, well, that might actually be a strong, I could have said to him that might be a very strong memory for me because of how much time that, because of it's such a important thing in my life. It has become such an important thing in my life.
Yeah.
It could show my dedication.
Do you think that, like, he might have thought that because obviously you came into the interest of becoming a medic,
that
that you just sort of
made a
heightened that memory afterwards, even if it did happen,
yeah
you could have like sort of exaggerated it in your own mind, like even if you
Without
completely
realizing.
even if you believe the exaggerations, like
yeah
it could
I think
still be changed. Like,
I think so. I think that is they are the questions that someone will ask when they're questioning the reliability of the memory. But the way I explained it, I don't think it was. I can remember this quite vividly. I can still remember the color of the stage that I was standing on.
So let me
Not the background.
We're
just the
gonna
floor.
we're gonna look at this story as the focus of today, yeah, because I think it's a really interesting story, and
Okay.
it's a really it gives enough motivation and passion behind why you became who you are today as well.
Yeah.
So it's I think it's a perfect story. One of the things I learnt recently in looking up this subject, because I got so obsessed with it when I put this hard drive in, that I was like, okay, I'm gonna try and understand how a hard drive works and how a mind works, and could you use it as an analogy? And I realized after just a little bit of research, the memory does not work like a hard drive at
No,
all. So a hard drive is it's a record of something, right? It's verbatim. So there's actually a manufacturer of if you remember CDRs and CDRWs of when you used to like burn CDs, a company used to be called Verbatim. They're like quite a good one. Verbatim literally just means like word for word.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have a record of something, it's certain facts and information that is copied, and each time it's looked at, just the act of looking at it doesn't degrade it in any way.
Yes,
Especially
yeah.
like with solid state drives and hard drives. I think with when people had record players, like those big black discs that people play music on those they would slowly wear out because it was very physical.
Yep.
But with memory, what I found out recently is that your brain will. So, for example, with your memory
Mm.
of being up on stage and learning the things that you learned, different parts of your brain would have been tasked with remembering. I use the word remembering, storing these neural pathways.
Yep. Yep.
And so the amygdala probably would have like focused on the emotion of being anxious, of being up on stage,
Yep.
and being frightened, and
See, I can't
that
remember.
nervous,
Yeah, but I can't remember any being frightened or anything.
or
like
maybe
that.
even excited. I don't know. Like
Yeah.
I genuinely don't know in that particular case, but I'm just hypothesizing that would have stored that, and then like the visual cortex
Yep.
would have remembered the color of
Yep,
the,
yep, yep.
the stage and things like that. Those details would have got stored in there, and then another part of your brain, the hippocampus, might have like remembered the details of what you said. So those memories are called explicit semantic. So they're basically facts and figures.
Someone's done their research.
Yeah, I was get excited about this, bro. And then there would have been the implicit memory of like the physical movement that you did, that and that's stored in another place. And when you recall the memory, what you are doing is actually recreating the memory each time. You're not actually like, for example, in a hard drive or on a computer, you'd search through directories, and you'd find the same memory stored in the same place every time, or that same file, video, music, whatever it is. In the case of your brain, it's all these different pathways, and each time you choose to remember it, your brain's almost recreating the memory, meaning recreating this picture, this experience in your mind. And so, like the question that...
and sometimes the way that it's like rephrased is to sort of serve a purpose.
Yeah.
So, as in, it depends on the memory and the type of memory that you're using. But like, imagine, even if it's like to feel better about yourself in a certain way, you could like sort of reform a memory.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually an act of imagination and creativity each time you remember something, which I find fascinating. Now, one thing I will say is when we say memory, we have to actually divide it up. So there's the experiential memories that you have of an occasion. So that particular story of when you were giving that presentation, very experiential, and it's got some things that are what you can say semantic, like specific facts and things that you said and the people who were there. But
episodic.
Episodic. And then there's other things that are very much to do with how you felt, things that you saw, things like that, which you could potentially add to over the course of time, over the course of remembering, the act of remembering. You could be like in the question that Hafiz Tahir gave was adding to it and exaggerating to it because of how much it became part of your story, part of your narrative. Now, there's another part of memory which is it's explicit semantic, and that's, for example, memorizing facts and figures. Like, for example, if I say to you, when did the Second World War end, right? You would know the date straight, well, at least the year. You would know the year straight away, 1945. There's almost like a rhythm and a music to it. If you forgot it, but you said 1946, something about it wouldn't sound right. There's nothing about that changes. Forget about if anyone else can verify it or not. Even in your brain, the way it's stored is different to the way that experience was stored. When you gave that, that life-affirming, life-changing presentation. So, I think something that I found difficult to swallow because of the way I look at myself and my own memories. Because when I think about memories and all the things that I know, I almost feel like that's what makes me who I am. So when someone starts saying, "Oh, wait a second, each time you remember these things, these experiences, what you're doing is actually you're recreating it. It's not like a record or a file, like a video or a picture. You can potentially manipulate it without even knowing." I kind of found that a little bit troubling.
So a few neuroscientists believe that memory doesn't actually exist until you display a behavior or you display the memory out in your action. For example, doing something or speaking something or even sometimes remembering something. And it makes sense because when you're a medical scientist or you're a doctor, you look at a brain and the amygdala is tiny and the hippocampus is tiny, and it's very there's a lot of surface area in the hippocampus, but you're just thinking you take that and then you look at a hard drive, for example, and you just can't match it. He's like, well, how is it stored? You know, yes, you know, with the hard drive, you could kind of explain how it's stored, but again, you know, the hard drive and the thing works kind of in a same way, where, you know, you have neural connections, and those neural connections will survive. But then again, those neural connections are being used for other things. So, you know, it's for me, I think I agree with I maybe it's a fascinating thing to think that memories don't exist, and they just come about when you live it, or when you experience it. I don't know. I just find that fascinating, and I think it's more agreeable. Than anything else. And it kind of makes sense, because with memories, a lot of memories, I mean, there are, for example, the story that I spoke about, it was just one, it wasn't a rehearsal. I didn't keep going over that memory again and again and again, right? It was one incident that had happened. But a majority of the other memories, and, you know, a lot of memories of experience is like that. And I guess it's a combination of where all these things are being stored makes that memory so strong. Whereas if you're just consuming a very limited information, for example, reading a book, you know, you're only storing it into a certain one part of your brain, where you have to keep repeating it again and again and again. For me, that sounds like you're enhancing those neural pathways. And that is what happens with children. So hopefully there is a connection, and you guys understand the connection. So babies are born with all the neural cells that they have. The only thing is they don't have the neural connections. And then eventually, I think a few months down the line, you have this massive explosion of neural connections, and the brain will start making these connections, meaning one cell will make a connection with another cell. And then you have this massive culling of neural connections. So when you get this massive explosion of neural connections, it's almost a developmental thing, where this creature could potentially have these experiences. If the baby doesn't experience some of these experience some of these things, therefore doesn't enhance these neural connections, those neural connections will just die away, and that is where you get the culling. Does that make sense? And I guess that is how we forget things, that through repetition we remember things, and we have to keep repeating it to enhance that pathway, enhance those neural pathways that are in place, and associate that neural pathway almost to whatever you're kind of memorizing. Does that make sense?
Well, now that you've used the word memorize, let's talk about what you guys have achieved in your lives. Deesh, Hafiz Tahir, we got you on because you are, along with obviously with Abdin, you're a Hafiz of the Quran. So what does that mean?
In terms of memorizing specifically?
Get that sucker up to your face, man.
In terms of memorizing specifically, I mean, you said about how you use different areas of the brain, and I think you could say the same thing with Hifz. Like, there's obviously, when you first start memorizing, you might just try and memorize what word comes after what word.
Mm-hmm.
But then after you get used to the words, you might start relying on a rhythm. And then maybe once you get more used to Arabic, you could start like adding more meaning to it.
Okay.
And I guess each of those stages, there's a different like depth of memory. Because just memorizing random words after another that you don't know the meaning of can only last so long. And a rhythm can stay with you for a bit longer than that.
So when you say rhythm, do you mean almost like music?
Yeah.
Okay.
And obviously the actual meaning can probably stay with you for life. So I think different people have different approaches to memorizing.
Yeah.
But you can use all of those areas for Hifz, I think.
Okay, so tell us the story of your journey of Hifz, like how it first started and what it was like for you that first day that you embarked on that journey as well.
Well, I took quite a while to do Hifz. Like, I finished in like year 11. So I did it throughout my whole like secondary period.
Okay.
And for the first few years, it took quite a while for me to like get used to a method to use to memorize. So I would struggle to memorize at half a page,
Mm-hmm.
and by year 10 and 11, yeah. So in my first 3 years, I barely did any, but then in year 10 and 11, like I just sort of found the rhythm
Yeah.
and techniques. Like as soon as I hit a like wall trying to memorize in one way, I could just swap to another method. For example, using a translation, or just literally doing the word for word if it can't click any other way, and I could memorize way more. But I think that sometimes is like more down to your expectations of how much you can memorize yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and also using your memory all the time. It can affect how good it is anyway. So at the beginning, if I only expected to be able to learn a page, I could only learn half. But then by the end, if I could expect to learn like 5, I would learn 3.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. So, in a way, when you say about rhythm, for you, it was the musicality and then the added like meaning and stories of the Quran, of what's being read, that helped you solidify it in your mind.
Yeah, I would try and make my memorization like a combination of all three, because, like for example, with Surah Yusuf, if you know the story of Surah Yusuf, you can, and you know kind of a bit of Arabic, you can sort of, even if you forget the next ayah, just knowing what happens next can sort of help you say the ayah again.
Sure.
And sometimes
sorry, go on, carry on.
And with other surahs where the meaning might not be so obvious, it would be down to a tune. And if there isn't like a strong tune that you have on that surah, then you have to just rely on literally remembering what ayah comes after what ayah.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously a lot of like ayahs and even tunes are like repeated in the Quran, so that can help as you go along. So that might have affected how hard it was to memorize later on as well.
Okay. Because when I spoke to you, you said for you, it was more visual as
Yeah.
opposed to auditory.
Yeah. So I think the same thing. What is your most powerful way? For example, for me, if I use a rhythm, I'll have to probably read a sentence 10 times to memorize it. If I use visualization, 3 times, and I've memorized it. So what is your most powerful way?
I really liked using a translation side by side.
Yeah.
Because once I got used to that, I kind of used that the rest of the way.
Yeah.
So you mean the English, knowing what it meant?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
If it was a story surah specifically,
Yeah.
like some surahs aren't stories, so it can be harder.
Yeah.
But if it's a story, then you can kind of remember the markers of where you are in the story
Mm-hmm.
and generally what's coming up next.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's literally just repeating the ayah again and again until the tune is in your head. But it doesn't always work, and
Yeah.
it kind of depends on your mindset on the day.
Okay.
What I found is I find the tune unreliable to read. If you just rely on the tune,
Mm-hmm.
it can get quite messy if you're throughout the page, for example.
Yeah.
But if you're reading a sentence, so this is what happens when I'm reciting, is that I've got the page in my head, I can see it in my head, and I'll recite it, and I won't see every single word in a sentence.
Yeah.
So there is probably I'm relying on the rhythm, because rhythm is quite powerful, but I do find it unreliable after about 5 or 6 sentences.
Okay.
Because when I was younger, when I started off, that was the main thing I used, and
Visual.
no
Rhythm. Okay.
like a lot, and I was just relying, and I used to be elsewhere just reciting, and then I'll keep getting mistakes. I can show you my Quran; it's just full of mistakes.
Yeah.
And then and I was struggling with that. I was struggling. Oh, why isn't it coming? Why isn't it coming? And I remember when I was in boarding school, one of the other my peer, he had memorized the Quran in 6 months.
Wow.
And I remember I asked him, help me, and he sat with me for about 20 minutes, and he said, "This is how you do it, like this." And he made me memorize one side in 20 minutes.
Okay. And what was his advice?
Through visualization.
Okay.
remember where everything is, and I it's exhausting. And to be honest, I didn't get it straight away.
So
I managed to memorize.
when you say visualization, you mean like take a picture of the page in your head?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so again, it's all this motion, all that. I mean, it's a lot. And so what I mean by what was really happening is, so that day he done it for me, and I memorized that whole thing, and then I went back to my old ways of memory, just relying on the kind of the rhythm. And I remember I lost it very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kind of used that with the old material that I was memorizing for Dor, right?
Yeah.
So I used to visualize it, and it went to the extent that when I used to recite it, I would have to turn the page.
Yeah.
Like physically turn the page while not looking, so that it's in my head. I've turned the page. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah. So I was doing that. Like when I used to recite, when my teacher used to listen to me, I used to look somewhere else, and I used to change the page. If I didn't change the page, or if he changed the page, I would be somewhere else.
Oh no.
So I think for me, visualization, and even now when I'm teaching, my students, I always tell them, visualize, just look at the page. So now when I'm memorizing, if I was to read a sentence for about 50 times, 45 of those times I'll be reading while I'm looking inside. Does that make sense?
So can I make 2 points or kind of questions to that? First is there's something really interesting about like there's something called memory champions, people who memorize things in competitions, and they can learn like hundreds and hundreds of like random numbers and recite them back, and and they have systems, and normally one of those systems is visual cues. So they use something called like a memory palace, where they will have a physical place, like it could be a house, it could be a city, where they'll walk through that city, and they'll start placing certain information in places to give it context, so that it's easier to remember as they literally just need to take a trip back through that route that they took, and they'll see those. So that kind of reminds me of that. I don't know if it's related. The second thing I was just going to say or comment on is, don't you think, because how you're making your students now do that, and your friend who gave you that advice and it seemed to work for you, do you not think it's
different for different people?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, how you have different learners. Do you not think that you'll have some learners who are more kinesthetic, and I don't know how you'd memorize the Quran if you're kinesthetic, but like visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. Do you think that could apply, or?
Wait, what does kinesthetic mean?
Like you learn through movement. So, for example, martial arts, like some people would watch a video of a martial artist and they'd learn the move straight away, but some people would need to actually physically do it to reinforce it in their mind. So I don't know how you would do that with the Quran, but
Yeah, it's difficult. I think everyone has the ability to learn with all types of learning.
Yeah.
Obviously, certain types of learning will be more enhanced. But what I've noticed is the kids that I use it with, they heavily rely on rhythm, exactly like me. And I've noticed the difference between when they are reading it, looking inside it. When I tell them look inside and read it 5 times and then look out, I've noticed a difference where they can actually
retain
remember
it.
And then now, even if they're using rhythm, I've noticed now with longer surahs, for example, recently I've made one of my students memorize Surah Yasin, which is a very long surah. Until now he's been memorizing very short chapters. Now you can tell that he's actually thinking, so he's there and he's looking up or he's looking down, and he's like, when you can tell someone is searching for something. And you can, and the way he's reciting, you can tell that he's not relying on the rhythm, although is an amazing thing, it's a fantastic thing, and it's a very helpful thing. But in certain places, it's not, especially with the mutashabihats, especially where you get repetitions of kind of the sentence or the beginning of the sentence, and that really throws you off. And in those places, for example, the last page of Surah Juz, fourth Juz. Is it fourth Juz?
Which one? What are you talking about?
where it's just full of mutashabihats, the same. I've forgotten which page it is. Anyway, it's just full of, or the second juz, I can't quite remember. It's just full of. It's so bad. It just goes to
called into question, bro.
It goes to show how how often I practice this.
Yeah.
And the sentences just start with the same letter
So
or
potentially
same
you
word.
could go down a different route of a surah.
Yeah, or
because
you just mix it up.
Yeah.
That's another issue with relying on rhythm. Is like if you suddenly get stopped in between and you lose the rhythm, then you just can't carry on.
Yeah.
Like
See, that was what was
like
happening to you.
in Tarawih, I wouldn't like let myself rely on rhythm, because if someone like suddenly took out a mistake, or if I got up from a rakat and I just couldn't carry on with the rhythm of the last bit, I would just get stuck.
Yeah.
So sometimes I would just try to not rely on rhythm at all.
Yeah. So with obvious, because we're taking exams as well, right? Have you noticed that what you're learning now at uni, the techniques that you're using to remember the information is different to the techniques that you use?
It's completely different.
It's different, isn't it?
I feel like memorizing Quran is like different from memorizing anything else.
Yeah.
It just feels like that anyway. I don't know if it's just because Quran is obviously has a different status, but the style of the methods I would use to memorize content at uni would be different to Quran.
What would you use?
I would just try to understand it more first before anything else.
But isn't that what you were doing with the Quran anyway?
But it's a different type of understanding. For example, like being able to apply it to like real life stuff.
Okay. Yep.
And then Quran is more like just translation.
Yeah.
Kind of understanding. Because it's like, imagine you had to memorize a page of a random language, like German words.
Yeah.
It would, if you just relied on syllable after syllable, it would just be completely different. So you try to like recognize certain words throughout it, but it would be different. Understanding it that way would be different to being able to apply what the German actually says to real life.
Yeah.
That would be how I would try to learn.
Do you use the visual way, like how he said?
I wouldn't use that, but I think when I'm reading Dora or something, naturally you would just be imagining what part of the page you're on.
Yeah.
Because like sometimes halfway down a page, you know that this is where this ayah is, and then some pages start with this bit. I don't know. I wouldn't make that my way of doing it, but it just happens naturally when you're trying to remember it.
Okay, so I'm just going to go off a slight tangent. This is not to in any way critique the visual process, because if it works for people like the friend who did it in 6 months, and for you, then it clearly works. But what was interesting about some of the research I was doing into memory is, in law, in justice, eyewitness and memory is used a lot in like vindicating someone, or in actually like getting someone sent away. And in about, like, I think the stat is just over 70% of cases where DNA exonerated someone from something.
And an eyewitness.
70% of those cases were like someone was sent to prison because of eyewitness account. Yeah. So whether like that doesn't take into question whether those people were lying or if they couldn't remember, right? But that's very much to do with visual memory.
Yeah. I think it's different though, because here you're using something visual to remember something in an auditory way. Does that make sense?
Also
through repetition.
Also the eyewitness testimonies, there's like a lot of other factors there that you wouldn't get with just memorizing Quran. Yeah. Like the anxiety and all that stuff of seeing like a crime.
Yes, and obviously with the Quran, you're reinforcing it, and you're
it's
deepening
clear,
those grooves.
Isn't it? It's clear. It's there. It's something that you can go over again and again.
Like there's no room for like yourself like adding anything.
Yeah, sure.
Because I still, like, obviously Zishan's saying but I've used that visual kind of aspect in, memorizing or, through my studies. Yeah. And maybe because my studies have been more factual as opposed to, economics or law, where you do have to apply to, obviously we do have to apply, but does that make sense? So even when I took I remember when I took, at A-levels, when I took psychology, when you were saying people were putting things in different places, I used to do it on my hand.
Oh, wow.
So I used to put certain things. So I used to remember things and I used to put it in certain places of my hand.
Yeah.
And then...
Did you do that instinctively? Or did you
learn
that
it was just... I just felt like, when I'm in the exam, I can look at something, like people taking paper. So it came from people taking papers to cheat. What if I had a paper, but there was nothing written on it, but I could see what was written on it.
Oh wow.
So that is what I done, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's very exhausting to do this stuff.
Yeah.
So I had it for my first psychology exams. I had it on my hand,
Yeah.
and I would look at it, and for I wouldn't remember everything, but I would remember that, and that would get me into the rhythm or of writing.
Yeah.
And then through my medical training as well, the same thing. There we have tons of lists to memorize, and placing things, so that a lot of people use that. They place things in different rooms as well, and they go through a heart attack room, for example.
Yeah.
For me,
is that technical term is heart attack room?
so that is how I put it, though.
Oh,
like I
okay,
would have a house or thing, and
Yeah.
I would go in, and it's a condition.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh wow. Okay.
And I would put things.
Yeah.
So I done that, and again, it's exhausting, and there's a lot of information.
Yeah.
So the best way I remembered, and everyone say, is remembering patients.
Yeah.
So I would remember symptoms, I would remember diagnosis and investigations, etc., just through remembering patients, and that is how I would remember. So even now, every time I see a patient with a condition, I would go and read up on that condition again,
Yeah.
and that would reinforce that information with that patient, and I will try to remember that patient.
Yeah.
And it's amazing because some of these patients, what will happen is you see them on the ward, and you remember their name, and you've been with them for about 2 minutes, and then they've gone, and then 2 or 3 weeks later, someone asks you, do you remember this look, this person has come back, and you just look at the name, and you're like, oh yeah, this person, and you can reel off everything that they had wrong with them.
Yeah.
So I think for me, I'm still using this visualization kind of process.
Memory palace thing.
Sorry?
The memory palace thing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that technique that you would use, I like using the different patients and stuff and your hand. That's like sort of like cues.
Yeah.
As in, it's not like
it's
necessarily visual, is it?
No, it's not. Yeah, you're right. But it's still. Does that make sense? It's still that you need
Spatial.
that
There's something
spatial or visual thing
Mm.
to remember things.
Mm.
Because even with Quran, I think you could use cues like, if I knew I would have to read it like standing,
Yeah.
then I would try and learn it standing, if that makes
Okay.
sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if a lot of people do that, but I would like to like stand up and read it
Recite,
walking around the room or something
yeah.
rather than sitting down in
Yeah.
one place. If I knew I was gonna like stand up, it just feels different to when you learn it sitting down.
Yeah, I know.
Or if you read it in a different room and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I guess the sort of like environmental cues can make a difference to how much you can memorize it as well.
Mm.
Because there's
Yeah.
even studies on when you memorize stuff drunk, you remember it better when you're drunk than when you're sober again.
Yeah, they say that when you are taking, say you're revising for a test, it's
Do
good
it
to
in-
revise in the room that you're going to be tested on, because
In the
Yeah.
same
in the
condition.
in the same condition.
Or wear
as well.
like the same perfume and you just remember.
I'm sure,
memorizing it,
yeah,
and-
because like perfume is like, for me especially, so linked with memories. Like I smell a certain perfume, it takes me back to like when I was a teenager, and
Yeah.
certain vivid, like how you're talking about like these vivid memories that
It's a
get triggered.
combination. I think a memory becomes strong because of these, a combination of things.
Environmental factors. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the brain is or has or is the neural pathways are saturated. Different neural pathways are saturated when you experience something.
Yeah.
For example, some people will experience a very strong emotional kind of situation,
Mm-hmm.
and for example, it's linked to something that they've become now. For example, when I was in year 1, I can remember that, I can explain it to you, but I can't explain everything that I went through yesterday.
Yeah.
I can't tell you the story of my life yesterday.
Well, it's interesting that you use that word story. So they say that the 3 most powerful elements or aspects of solidifying memory is story, place, and emotion.
Okay.
And so in the case of that particular memory,
Yeah, yeah.
it's got so, like, you can remember the exact physical place of it.
Yeah.
You can remember the emotion of it,
Mm.
and it plays such a big part in this construction of the narrative of who you are.
Yeah, yeah.
So of course it would be, like a massively powerful memory. And that's the thing, with when it comes to Islam,
Mm.
memory and oral transmission of history is so important.
Yeah, yeah.
And I know, like, in science, there's a sort of move towards trying to make memory seem like not a reliable source. But then you can also see, in the case of these, like, memory champions, that memory can be incredibly powerful for remembering things.
But
Like-
the type of memories that they're like,
It's a different,
it's
yeah,
just a
exactly.
random stuff, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it's more to do with experience and using it in the justice system. But I think one thing that I find really interesting about memory and history as well is that it's about preserving something, and it's about making sure that that thing isn't lost. And
Yeah.
actually, what the word hafiz means, which I looked up for this conversation, is incredible. I find it incredibly powerful. It actually means someone who is a hafiz is a protector.
Yeah.
That's what that word means. So, yeah.
But I mean, with Quran, as Zishan was saying, it's very different. It's amazing because, when I memorized it, I didn't know the Arabic language. I didn't know, even now, I don't know what half the Quran says. I know it's quite disappointing, but, thousands and millions of people have been able to memorize a language which isn't their mother tongue.
Yep.
They don't even understand it, but they've been able to memorize it.
There is a miracle of that, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
that is one of the miracles of the Quran,
yeah,
right? That
yeah.
it can be memorized by so many people, and that's proven by the fact that it is.
Yeah. And that is, it shows the authenticity of the Quran now.
Yeah.
Like, if you were to test somebody, on one side of the world and test somebody on the other side of the world,
Yes.
they won't make they don't make
There's
a
no
mistake.
difference, yeah, as well.
And then when you have the transmissions as well, so usually a Hafid will have a line of transmission that, this is my student, learn it from all the way up to the Prophet ﷺ. So,
Yeah.
well, you should.
It's amazing.
And I think what this shows, although a lot of people question oral transmissions of things, it shows that the Quran hasn't been changed.
Yeah.
If the Quran had been changed, there'll be discrepancies existing in the world now.
Yeah, this is it. And this is not in any way to get contentious with Christianity or any of the other major faiths that have books, but you don't see the number of people who have memorized the Quran. You don't see the same number replicated in people who've memorized the Bible or
Yeah.
the Bhagavad Gita or any of the other big texts. It's a very specifically Muslim phenomenon that you
Yeah.
have all these people around the world from different backgrounds who don't speak the same language, who don't share the same cultural heritage, and yet they still have memorized this text in a way that, like you said, you could get both of them together, and when they read it, their recitation of it will be the same letter for letter.
Yeah. It's mad, isn't it?
It's amazing. I think I find that, and that's why I want to talk about it on today. It's just because I feel like memory and being able to have that potential in the mind is so amazing. It shows how amazing that the human being can be.
Yeah.
It shows what our potential can be. Like, for example, you memorized the whole Quran. We're from the same family, and we share a lot of the same genetic makeup. There's no reason. It tells me that there's no reason why I can't even attempt to try. Because if he from my own family, I mean, look at us. We're 10 years apart in age, but we look so similar. So in terms of our physiology, yeah. Obviously, if you're listening to this on Apple or Google Podcast, you can't tell. But me and my brother, like, we look very similar, even though I'm 10 years older than him. If physiology can be
You guys
so
have
similar,
dressed similar as well.
yeah, I know
Oh
that
my
was actually
God.
completely unintentional as well. But
Sorry,
yeah,
Josh,
so it's if physiology can be similar, there's no reason why I don't have the same potential to do it as well. And if that's the case, and I know that I'm not in any way like some kind of exemplary specimen of what a human being can be, so many people around this world have such an untapped, unfulfilled potential in their mind of memory.
Mm.
And it's I find that it's a shame that modern education doesn't utilize it more, like how classical traditional education
Yeah.
used to. But yeah, that's kind of my take on this thing. You want to say anything else? I don't know what's going to happen with using your memory this Ramadan because of cheeky COVID-19.
Oh.
Like, there might not be Taraweeh, so
You can memorize other things.
you looking happy about that?
Yeah, no stress this year.
Actually, that's one thing I wanted to ask. So you both went to madrasa to memorize the Quran, yeah? And that in itself must have been quite traumatic and stressful. Added to that, you had to undertake something which is an enormous feat, which is memorizing a book which is 600 pages in a language that you aren't familiar with. So the aspect of madrasa and the stress and trauma of that, like that, I can't imagine that would have helped the process.
I think
Not for me.
It didn't
Because
help.
I couldn't complete it. I've done 15.
Yeah,
And
which is amazing. That's a lot. That's 300 pages.
yeah.
You know?
And ever since then, I've been, increasing it slowly.
Yeah.
But I just feel like if I was, it's difficult because I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't change going to madrasa. But I wish it, when you look back and you're like, oh, I wish I was in primary school. You get these nostalgic periods.
Yeah.
I try to avoid that because I know if I was in primary school now, I'll have to go through whatever I went through in madrasa. It's very traumatic, and I wouldn't recommend it for anybody.
Yeah.
And some people might say what, but boarding school and getting children from so many different backgrounds go in and maybe they've improved now, but going to a institution which isn't. They're not high tech out there.
Yeah.
They can give you a good Islamic kind of knowledge and information,
Mm-hmm.
but
But did it
I
help?
saw
Did it
more
help
people.
the process of memorization? Because you were isolated from the rest of society and other stimulus. Did it help, or was
I think
the
it
stress?
was because I was given more time because I was in madrasa.
Yeah.
It was because I could give more time to memorization,
Okay.
and that was the only thing that helped. I think if I was if I was given that much time while living at home, where I wasn't homesick, where I wasn't just counting down the days to go home, where I wasn't developing this subconscious kind of fear or dislike towards whatever I was trying to learn there.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would have been able to complete it.
So your memory of the Quran that you have now are you saying it's kind of contaminated with those? I'm not saying contaminated in astaghfirullah, but it's slightly contaminated with all the negative association you had with the madrasa.
No, I think no, it hasn't. It hasn't been, but I mean,
that was a serious pause, bro.
Yeah,
That's a dramatic pause.
it's difficult because it hasn't been because I see them as two different things
Okay.
consciously.
Okay.
I can't speak I can't
What
say
about you?
unconsciously.
I don't know if I would be able to do it at home.
Shout out to Leicester Darul Uloom.
Yeah, Darul Leicester.
Yeah,
But
I don't think I'll be able to do it at home.
Okay.
and especially after having left, I just feel like I didn't really have any excuse for not putting in more effort while I was there,
Mm-hmm.
because I won't really get that time to focus on it,
Yeah.
on one thing like that ever again. Or maybe I will, but it's just that part of my life was just dedicated to that.
Yeah.
And
But there was also things that, like things that your mind would have definitely stored and processed, like, for example, trauma of being away from home and
I would say my trauma wasn't, I mean, the first year was,
not trauma like Vietnam,
yeah,
what I'm saying?
I mean, I think the first year was quite hard,
Yeah.
but then towards the later years, I probably enjoyed it more there than I did at home.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I mean,
So you've
'cause
got
the home was
positive
pretty
memories
boring.
to sort of associate with
Yeah.
the whole process as well.
And towards the end, like, memorizing was kind of fun in a way because it would get competitive with me and my friends.
Okay, yeah.
And because we would be going over stuff so much, like, towards the end of madrasa, it was, like, so strong that every day was like quite fun, going in, reading, knowing that you knew everything, and then learning the next day stuff. And yeah, I don't know if I'll be able to focus that much on Quran ever again. And Ramadan's really the only time when I get to or force myself to.
Yeah. Okay, so quick question for both of you then. It's a two-parter, so try and like break it up when you answer it. One is, if you were gonna, as someone who's gone through this process of memorizing so much of the Quran or all of it, what would you say to a parent about how they should go about helping their child to memorize the Quran? Number one, and number two, from what you've learned, and number two, if someone themselves were like, if they were literally Googling how to memorize the Quran, what would you say to that person? Tips.
If I start with the second question first.
Go on then.
I was going to start with the second question first.
I think it's an easier question to answer because it's just a case of just starting, really.
Okay.
It doesn't really matter about the speed that you do it,
Mm-hmm.
because once you're finished, nobody really cares how fast you did it. Well, you shouldn't care yourself how fast you did it. It's just the fact that you have it. And it's not, if anything, it's better if you take longer, because it just means more amount of time that you've spent reading Quran.
Yeah.
And in some cases, you've learnt it better by the end of a longer period. I think a lot of people probably don't start because they don't think they can. But it's really not that hard.
Okay, and what about tips on memorizing? Like how you guys were talking about before, like with rhythm and place, and have you got any specific?
I think just experiment with different styles.
Okay.
Most people will probably just have like the same rhythm style at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
They could just try listening to reciters or listening to the same bit again. But generally, it's just a different thing works for everyone else. So
Okay.
it would be just a case of experimenting, finding something that works, and then using that until they need to like change it up again.
Okay. Do you want to do the kid thing, or shall I move on to Abdin?
The kid thing, I don't really know what advice I'd give, because at the beginning I wasn't that excited to go to madrasa, but then towards the end I was happy that I'd gone.
Yeah.
And with some people at madrasa, I saw that they were forced there, and by the end they still weren't happy that they'd gone.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like after having left, they swung in the opposite direction basically.
Mm.
So everyone's different, but I'd say the best way is just to sort of make Quran part of the lifestyle rather than making it separate from everything they enjoy. Just making it part of the day,
Okay.
like seeing Quran as something that they appreciate rather than like a chore basically.
Yeah, man. Because I remember for us, it was. I mean, I'm not blaming my mum. She did the best she can. She sent you to madrasa, and alhamdulillah, you became a hafiz. But for me, reading Quran was a punishment. Like,
Yeah.
what are you not doing? Go read some Quran.
I think that's very important. I think reducing that. So if I were to punish my students and give them detention,
Yeah.
I don't let them read the Quran.
Oh wow.
So I'll stop them from reading the Quran, and I'll get them to do something else, which is just mundane and boring.
That's
because
amazing.
I don't want to build that.
Negative association.
God.
Yeah.
Which is very important. With that, I mean, what I'm going to say, it might be impractical, but I think it's very important that we start thinking like this. Is if you want a child to start memorizing the Quran, start very early and start getting them to, learn Arabic, the language itself.
Okay.
I think that will make a massive difference.
Okay.
And maybe we don't have the infrastructure, but we could develop an infrastructure for that. But having said that, it doesn't mean that if a child doesn't know Arabic, that they can't. There's thousands of people who don't know Arabic, and they're still memorizing, millions of people. The other thing is go easy on them, and bring about the niceness of reciting the Quran, and migrate to a place where there's a madrasa and you can send your child without them having to board there.
Okay.
Do not separate them from
Home life.
From you, because this isn't a generation. We aren't a generation, or the generations that are coming that are willing to do that. They probably can't do that.
Yeah.
The other thing is, and I've noticed that a lot of, it's good to get people listening to the Quran, but and I've noticed this with my children, and this goes with not just memorizing the Quran, but learning Arabic, meaning the alphabets, etc. Do not go through the information that the children haven't gone through. So, for example, if they're on page 4, don't teach them page 5 at home, because you're probably going to teach them wrong. Or just go over the things that they've already gone over.
Reinforce it.
Reinforce that.
Yeah.
The reason I say that is because the way I teach the young children how to read is that I'll listen to them, or it's about letter recognition, for example. I'll get them to recognize the letter or figure out what the letter is by looking at previous lessons, and then I'll say it to them, as opposed to just dishing it out to them. Oh, this is alif, or this is ba, and this is... Maybe at the beginning you have to say that, but eventually change that. So that's for my little piece for parents, and I'm sure there's so much other thing. The second part about people starting, I think what Zishan said is get started and do it. You can do it slowly. It'll be hard at the beginning. Eventually it'll get easier. And start small. Don't try to memorize, 5 pages. Find a time. Divide your, the way I do it now is I divide my day up. So at certain times I'll do three lines, 3 lines, 3 lines. You chunk it up. It's manageable. At the end of the day, you get 9 lines out of that. The other things, or in terms of exploring and experimenting with rhythm, visualization, I think use all of them, and some of the best memories are the ones that have been stored in so many different parts of your memory. So use all of them. And the other thing, what the Sahabas, I think this is very important and is very difficult to do, but it's something to keep in mind. What the Sahabas used to do is when a revelation was revealed, the way they used to memorize it is they used to learn it and they used to implement it within their lives.
Okay. The lesson of what's being said.
Yeah. I think that's a fantastic way of memorizing the Quran, because you're living the Quran as well. And although that helps you memorize, it is better for your life because you're living Islam.
Yeah,
you are doing what Allah has asked you to do.
Yeah.
And I think that's more important than actually memorizing the whole Quran.
Oh, that's awesome. You know what? That thing that I said at the beginning of how the way I looked at memory was, and also as it related to who I am and how I perceive myself, is these collection of memories and all these experiences. And if scientists are questioning these things, then does that mean I have to question like my notion of who I am? Thinking about it now, with how you can't argue with the fact that all these memory champions are able to memorize these things and recall them with a great deal of accuracy. Hearing you talk about how you have this part of your memory, but it's also something that when you act on the wisdoms of it, it improves your life. And so ultimately, like for you guys especially, and for all Muslims, because all Muslims in some way memorize some parts of the Quran. Like
at least the last 10 surahs, right?
At least the last 10 surahs, like me. These memories that we have are part of who we are, and define the way that we behave and how we move forward in life.
And sorry, like it's
that was
a little bit on...
such a good closing.
Sorry. I'm just going to say something. It's just so we know the last 10 surahs, right?
Yeah.
Is very important that we actually know what it means.
Yes.
Because it completely changes the dynamics of the surah. For example, for protection, we read the last 2 surahs. When you know what it means. And, again, Norman Ali Khan on YouTube, he does a tafsir. It's brilliant. When you know what it means, you can recite that surah with so much power. It's amazing. It feels like that the jinns have just they've just run away because you've just recited Surah Nas and Surah Falaq.
Yeah. Well, that was actually a much better ending. So I think we'll leave it there, boys. Bye, everyone.
Yeah, boy.